What if I told you that skipping a simple Sunday Mass, just one, could begin a slow erosion of your soul, even without your awareness? That what begins as a missed obligation could quietly become a missed relationship, a dimming light, a weakening tether to the very heart of God. For centuries, Catholics have rightly feared the spiritual consequences of mortal sin, but in our age of convenience, personal autonomy, and emotional rationalization, a dangerous assumption has crept in. God understands. I'll just skip this Sunday. It's not that serious. That thought, so quiet, so seemingly harmless, is often the first whisper of a much deeper disconnection. This is not about scrupulosity or fear-mongering. This is about fidelity, about covenant, about the Eucharist, which the Catechism calls the source and summit of the Christian life. Not a supplement or a nice weekly tradition, but the beating heart of our communion with Christ. When a Catholic misses Sunday Mass deliberately, with no grave reason, and without seeking the Church's permission or guidance, it is not a casual slip. It is a rupture, a sin so grave that the Church, in her long and careful wisdom, has historically taught it to be mortal, capable of cutting us off from sanctifying grace, not because the Church is harsh, but because the Eucharist is that holy. Yet today, far too many Catholics are walking a quiet line between necessity and neglect. Life is chaotic. Emergencies arise. We are human. You might be a nurse on call, a single parent without childcare, a traveler stranded in a remote place, or someone battling illness. And in these moments, your desire to be at Mass may remain burning strong, even as your body, your schedule, your circumstances do not permit it. But here's the danger. When we do not act, when we do not ask, when we quietly decide for ourselves that God understands, we cross from genuine limitation into unspoken rebellion, not always in heart, but in habit. And spiritual disconnection never begins with an explosion. It begins with neglect. Pope Leo XIV, in his recent Corpus Christi homily, spoke clearly to this crisis in the modern Church. The tragedy of our age is not just disbelief, but believers who live as though the Eucharist is optional. In such forgetfulness, the Church ceases to be radiant. He speaks not to the rebellious, but to the weary, the distracted, the well-intentioned, those who still say they believe in the real presence, but live as though Christ waits for them in a mere idea, not in the tabernacle. And in this forgetfulness, we are not only starving ourselves, we are dimming the light the world so desperately needs. This misunderstanding begins with a subtle shift in theology. Some Catholics today treat Sunday obligation like a family dinner. Good if you can make it, but God won't be offended if you miss. But the Mass is not a family gathering. It is a representation of Calvary, a sacramental participation in the once-for-all sacrifice of Christ. Hebrews 10 verse 25 urges us, "Do not neglect to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." Skipping Mass without cause is not just neglecting community. It is walking away from Christ on the altar, from the moment where heaven opens and the Lamb of God offers himself anew. The Church is not without mercy. In fact, mercy is at the very center of this conversation. For those genuinely prevented from attending Mass, she offers something beautiful, a dispensation, not a loophole, but a structured expression of compassion, a recognition that life on this earth is complex, and that holiness sometimes looks like sacrifice in the form of hospital shifts, long-distance caregiving, or unavoidable obstacles. Dispensation is the Church saying, "We see you. We believe your longing is sincere. We accompany you." But, and this is crucial, dispensation is not assumed. It must be requested. Why? Because humility is part of obedience, and obedience is the first act of worship. To skip Mass without asking for a dispensation is, in practice, to decide for the Church. It is to take her teaching, her sacramental economy, and say, "I'll determine what matters today." And Pope Leo XIV warns of this very spirit. The collapse of spiritual fervor does not begin with persecution, but with private authority taking the place of ecclesial obedience. He is not condemning those in pain. He is illuminating how even sincere Catholics fall into silent disconnection, forgetting that the Church is not a spiritual vending machine, but the bride of Christ, alive, visible, and guiding. Linda is a hospice nurse. Every Sunday morning, while most Catholics are hearing the first reading, she is holding the hand of a dying patient, whispering prayers between administering medication. She once thought she was just missing Massachusetts, but after speaking to her priest during a weekday liturgy, she was granted a dispensation. He told her to unite her suffering with Christ's and to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet for each soul entrusted to her care. And now, Sunday is no longer a wound of guilt, but a deeper communion, an altar formed beside a hospital bed. David, a retired Marine, planned a cross-country trip to visit grandchildren. While checking his itinerary, he realized he'd be in rural Wyoming on a Sunday with no church for over 100 miles. His first instinct was, God will understand. But then, his conscience pricked him. He called his parish before leaving, spoke to the deacon, and received a dispensation. He brought with him a missal and a rosary. That Sunday, around a campfire, he read the Mass readings aloud with his grandkids and offered his absence with reverence, not presumption. And then there's Mr. Ruiz, 86 years old, widowed and nearly blind. He's been watching televised Mass for years from his apartment, never knowing he could simply call and ask. When his granddaughter finally told him about dispensations, he was stunned. All this time, he said, I thought I was failing God. That phone call lifted a decade of quiet shame. These stories are not outliers. They are echoes of the Church's motherly heart, but they also reveal something sobering. How many Catholics do not know they must ask? And worse, how many no longer feel the need to? Skipping Mass has become normal, especially post-pandemic, where live streaming blurred the lines between physical presence and spiritual substitution. But watching the Mass on a screen, when you're physically capable of attending, is not attending at all. It is a form of absence clothed in activity. As Pope Leo XIV writes in Eucharist and the Wounded Church, the screen may transmit the sound, but not the sacrament. The liturgy is not consumed in thought, it is consumed on the tone. This is not about legalism, it is about love. When a spouse fails to come home one night without calling, something sacred is broken, not just the role of communication, but the intimacy of trust. So too with the Massachusetts. When we skip it without explanation, even with the excuse of love, we begin to forget that love has a structure, that grace comes through obedience, that God's mercy is not licensed to drift, but a bridge back when we stumble. If you are sick, if you are trapped in unavoidable circumstances, if you are working in service to the vulnerable, do not despair. The Church does not punish weakness. She uplifts those who seek to remain united even when scattered. But you must seek. You must ask. You must not choose silence when the doors of mercy are wide open. To do nothing is to slowly accept separation. And in that separation, the soul suffers, not with fire, but with cold. The cold of distance from the sacrament that was meant to sustain you.